X-Men 97 is here, and it's a big success. I haven't seen this much love for a Marvel project in a long time. In fact, I think this show might just have saved the MCU. And I know what you're thinking. You're thinking, Josh, come on, man. Like, you've said this before. It's just a couple episodes of a cartoon show. What are you on about? First of all, shut your mouth when you're talking to me. Second of all, I got 5 reasons in this video as to why it is actually saving the MCU. And by the time you watch all of the different reasons, you're gonna 100% guarantee agree with me.
What?
Seriously, these are 5 really good reasons. Let's break it down. So the reason number 1 that I think X-Men 97 saves the MCU is because it addresses a major problem that OG Marvel fans have had with the MCU currently. And basically this just amounts to feeling like they aren't heard or that they don't matter. In the last several years of Marvel Studios content, there's been a big effort to sort of broaden the appeal of the Marvel Cinematic Universe. This includes introducing a ton of new characters, trying out new styles of storytelling. And while I do think efforts like that make sense and they actually are important because you do want to grow the brand, you can't do it at the cost of your original fans, the fans that supported you for years and years and years, the ones that literally keep the lights on. I talked a lot about this show before it even came out just because it was a super big deal. Like, I knew this was going to be very important for a lot of nerds because this show in the 90s was massive and it actually did bring a lot of people in to geekdom, into fandom, into being a fan of the X-Men and of Marvel. And I think given the history in the past couple of years of the Marvel Cinematic Universe, there was a lot of fear from fans like myself that the nostalgic things we loved and the things that really made the show what it was in the 90s would be abandoned for trying to introduce this stuff to modern audiences or for trying to adapt this in ways that are more accessible to people that don't read comics. And after 2 episodes of X-Men 97, I can tell you that fear has been alleviated. Like, this show is perfect and it feels just like it did back in the day. And I do think there are certain elements that have been updated, and some of those I'm actually going to talk about in the rest of this video. But at its core, this feels like a love letter to fans of the X-Men, to fans of the old 90s X-Men cartoon, and the OG Marvel fans just feel like they are getting a win. They feel like they are being catered to and being heard by a studio that has kind of drifted away from them. Like, I want to move on to the other reasons as to why I think this show is literally saving the MCU, but this point should not be understated. This is a very big deal. Whether it's freaking Ralph Boner or the treatment of Gore the God Butcher or just weird changes to the comic book lore, there have been a lot of different reasons for OG Marvel fans to be frustrated with what the Marvel Cinematic Universe is currently doing. And again, this show fixes that, and it also shows us that Marvel is still capable of catering to us old school Marvel fans. Reason number 2 X-Men 97 is saving the MCU is that it is tapping into mass appeal. The show has been trending, it's going crazy on social media, and even celebrities like freaking LeBron James are out here tweeting about the X-Men 97 show. And I think this just speaks to the impact that the old 90s show had on a bunch of people. Like, again, that show blew up, it was massively successful, but the X-Men themselves are also just this mass appeal, super popular brand, maybe one of the strongest brands ever created in comic books. And it's crazy because it's an animated show, which usually does not have the blueprint of a show that's in live action. Usually live action shows just tend to do better as adults, especially adults in the West, don't really consider cartoons to be as sophisticated or mature content. That's of course changing with things like Invincible, but the most part, live action shows still do a lot better than animated shows. And yet X-Men 97 is blowing up. Like, you see the imprint of the show all over the internet, and even 2 days later, people are still talking about it. I saw freaking Gambit was trending on Twitter at like 100K tweets. Gambit's fucking trending, you know what I mean? And what's really cool about this is I think it's sort of a reminder to Marvel that you don't have to try to make the Eternals work. You don't have to try to make Shang-Chi a really popular character. You have a catalog of incredible characters that people already recognize recognize and love. I mean, again, I've said this many times, but the X-Men themselves are the like highest grossing, most successful comic book of all time. That's why Marvel sold the license to Fox in the first place, because they could show the executives at Fox, like, look at all these comics that have been sold that have X-Men on them. And I think at a time when Marvel is sort of going through an identity crisis and they're maybe realizing that they had a false positive with Guardians of the Galaxy, and you can't just always take C and D level characters and make them into A-list movie star big franchises, it's important to have a signaler like X-Men 97 that just shows us in real time what it's like when you tap into characters and brands that are strong. Like X-Men is strong, man. And they earned that through years and years and years of incredible comic book stories, of incredible characters, amazing designs that people love, fun powers. Like, this is huge, and it's happening at a perfect time for Marvel Studios. So that's the second reason. Reason number 3 as to why X-Men 97 is saving the MCU all has to do with the live action MCU. They're taking pitches right now for what the X-Men will look like in live action in the MCU. It was 5 years ago today when I'm recording this video, hopefully when you're seeing it as well, when the assets of Fox were acquired by Disney and Disney got the rights back to the Fantastic Four and the X-Men. And it's taken 5 years to get actual X-Men stuff going on in the MCU. And even though X-Men 97 is not in the 616 MCU universe, it is still happening at a time when Marvel is actually moving forward with live action MCU stuff. Now, there's a ton of stuff going on that's live action X-Men in the Deadpool 3 movie, and I do think X-Men 97 is this great appetizer to what we're gonna see in Deadpool 3 because of the evidence of seeing Charles Xavier and Beast in the MCU. We can kind of see that they tend to look like they did in the 90s X-Men show. But beyond that, we know that Marvel Studios is currently accepting pitches for their actual MCU 616 X-Men. Like, they're about to start in earnest taking these characters and adapting them for the 616 MCU. And X-Men 97 is doing this brilliant thing of being super freaking successful and being beloved by all these fans and celebrities, and sort of showing Marvel that maybe they don't have to stray too far from the X-Men formula. Maybe they already have the perfect thing to just adapt and then be successful with. And by the way, we've already seen this attitude start to be adapted by Marvel Studios. Look at the Daredevil Born Again show. This is a show that they looked at after the first version and decided this just isn't working. We're going to remake it, and we're going to bring back a ton of people from the old show just to kind of connect to that vibe. An executive producer over at Marvel Studios, Brad Winderbaum, has been on record talking about how Loki Season 2 and X-Men 97 were a part of why they made that decision on Daredevil Born Again. Like, what I'm trying to say here is Marvel looked at this and they said, wow, if we just honor what came before and take what was working and amplify it and not try to reinvent the wheel, like not try to make our own MCU version so different, I think that's a better path for success. And that's proven to be the path of success for Loki Season 2 and for X-Men 97. Like, again, it's blowing up. And because we're seeing Marvel do that to Daredevil Born Again as well, I think X-Men 97 is just going to push Marvel Studios into being more traditional and really just taking what they already have with the X-Men, which is great stories for like so many years in the comics, and just adapt that for your 616 X-Men. This one's actually a super big deal because there's a identity crisis happening at Marvel. A lot of fans are worried about what their version of the X-Men are going to be. And so X-Men 97 kind of gives some confidence to fans that they can still just adapt and make the X-Men the X-Men. And I think it also signals to Marvel Studios that, yes, this is something that fans are resonating with. You should do more of that. And so I'm hoping that X-Men 97 and its success will have a big impact on what Marvel's doing right now in developing what the live action MCU 616 X-Men will be like. The number 4 reason that X-Men 97 is saving the MCU has to do with politics. Maybe you didn't notice this, but we live in a day and age when things are pretty tense, especially in the West with regards to political beliefs. Yeah, man, the culture war is still raging big time, and you got people that are very passionate about that on both sides. And then you got a ton of fans like me in the middle that think both sides are crazy and I just want good content and whatever. But the point is, I think X-Men 97 is handling its politics brilliantly. And this is such a big concern, I think, for me, but I think for a lot of other fans, because what's weird about the X-Men is they've always been political. They've always been allegories for civil rights, and that implies that you're gonna get a lot more of that stuff sort of modernized. Like, if you just think about it without the context of the culture war, if that's the identity of the franchise, of those characters, then of course that would be updated when they adapt it for a modern audience. But of course, even saying that out loud kind of like gives me a little bit of a scare, because a lot of what we've seen recently in media coming out of Hollywood and different places that try to talk about identity politics, it ends up just being super divisive and just like annoying, right? It's not matching the feeling of the franchises, of the world, of this sort of escapist idea, because I do think X-Men is still ultimately escapism. It's just escapism that is also trying to signal to you some interesting points about belief system, about in-group, out-group, and I think the way that they've handled that just in the first 2 episodes of X-Men 97 has been great. It's been even-handed. It hasn't been too extreme, and yet it's still speaking to the truth of those characters, and I think the truth of human perspective, the oppressed becoming oppressors, and that whole speech by Magneto in the UN, I thought it was brilliant. It goes right up to that line, but it doesn't cross that line. That is actually really freaking cool. I truly believe this was handled perfectly. Like, I just think you can't really be offended by what's in X-Men 97 unless you're like a really, really sensitive, like very chronically online, like kind of a person. And I think that's reflected in just how people are talking about it. Like, you've got the people out there that are being buttholes about it on both sides, but for the most part, I think people are just appreciating the show for what it is and understanding that those struggles are a part of the identity of these characters and of this franchise. There's a lot more I could say about this, but I think the bottom line, like to just kind of crystallize it for you, this is an example of Marvel doing political things right. They're just handling it very gently with nuance. They're keeping it true to the characters and not trying to make it anything other than that. Like, I really do think this is a super big deal. This is something that could be very damaging to Marvel moving forward. As I was just saying, they're currently adapting the X-Men for the live action stuff. And so if it were like overtly pushy and they were just like being real crazy with the politics, it's going to turn people off. Like, you might not like that, but it is true. Look at the world we live in. Like, I know people get super sensitive about this particular topic, but if you just take a step back and you understand that this is supposed to be 4-quadrant mass appeal entertainment, and also realize that we live in this very divisive age where any mention of identity politics sets a whole bunch of people off, you can just, I think, objectively understand that those two things don't go together. So you've got to realize you probably can't change the state of the world. You can't change the state of the culture war, but what you can change is how you approach these divisive topics. I think X-Men 97 did a great job, and I think it's a path forward for Marvel, and they need to understand why it works here and then adapt it into their live action universe. And the fifth and final reason as to why I think X-Men 97 is saving the Marvel Cinematic Universe has to do with story and character. A lot of people don't want to admit it, but the real reason that Claremont's X-Men took off and the real reason that Marvel differentiated itself from other publishers like DC is because it embraced soap opera ideas. There's a ton of drama and history and conflict amongst these characters. And just like a family, there's this sort of bonded thing that happens while also acknowledging the differences and the sort of little petty arguments and things that they don't like about each other. This has always been the juice of the X-Men, but man, these first 2 episodes of X-Men 97 nailed that aspect. This is storytelling that works on the macro, but also on the micro. You've got little character moments that end up being fulfilled later on, like when you have the discussion with Jean and Storm talking about basically Cable and Jean wanting him to maybe be normal and not a mutant. And then you have Aurora talking about how she's thought about being human. And that comes into play later when Storm loses her powers. You've got Logan being kind of angry and petty, and then you realize it's actually because he doesn't want to lose Jean, and maybe Cyclops to a degree as well. He thinks they're going to leave once they have the child. You've got Rogue's feelings of isolation. You've got Gambit's desire to be with her, and then history and spicy stuff going on with Magneto, who appears to be one of the only people that Rogue can actually touch. And you also have the death and the legacy of Charles Xavier hanging over the entire show. The way the characters relate to Charles, the way that Scott wants to uphold his legacy, and then, oh no, all of a sudden Magneto's here, and it appears Charles Xavier wanted Magneto to be the one to take over his dream and see it fulfilled. It's fantastic stuff, man, and a lot of this is pulling from the Chris Claremont X-Men stories, which were the most popular thing in Marvel for a long time. And there's a reason. I mean, Claremont is just great at this exact stuff. He made it a soap opera, a family book with all kinds of drama and tension, and yet it's still superheroes, bombastic, crazy, big scale things happening, Apocalypse, the Dark Phoenix, clones, Mr. Sinister, timelines, all this wild stuff, but it's anchored with human story. And at a time when Marvel stories feel really disjointed, if you look at the shows, you look at the live action movies, they feel really disjointed, and they're just coming up short with some of the drama and the tension that they're trying to create. This show is a great reminder that Marvel Studios doesn't have to reinvent the wheel. They can just look at what's worked in comics and adapt it. And it's happening in X-Men 97. And it's amazing. Fans are going crazy for it. And this is exactly something that Marvel needed to be reminded of as they are developing the next phase of Marvel content, which is supposed to represent a turnaround of sorts. I also want to say that we've been so hyped up for X-Men 97 that we created our first new line of Den of Nerds merch in years. 2 of the mutant-inspired designs are already up on our Teespring, and we'll have 2 more coming next week. The merch is dope, man. I'm ordering a bunch for myself. I think it's fantastic. And again, we haven't had new merch in years. So check that out and let me know, did these 5 reasons that X-Men 97 is saving the MCU convince you that it's actually happening? I hope you're having an awesome and a nerdy day, and I'll see you in the next video.